Humans have been struggling for millions of years, right? In order to rise, first to become the apex predator in nature. We have to figure out how we can get harder, smarter, faster, and stronger. Look back at Stone Age technology and you ask, how do we even emerge from this, incredible, terrifying scrum? And there's just key technologies that you decide you kind of like in a hurry, right? One of them is fire. Fire is like the prime energy network of the human race. It all started for us with channeling energy. And what is it? Fire is a chain reaction, right? Where we're releasing the latent energy in matter. We're converting matter into energy, right? You're that human being, and you want to rise above the tigers and the packs of wolves and the other creatures and the snakes and the jungle. How are you going to do that? You're going to have to tap into and channel energy. Is to Satoshi, right? As fire is to Bitcoin. Bitcoin's a fire. It's a fire in cyberspace. Fire came along first, and when you think about what it means, and most people don't necessarily think very hard about it. You always had it, right? If you're an individual, what can you do with fire? Well, you can start by starting a fire so you don't freeze to death. I hunt with it. I cook with it. There's a lot of biologists that make, and the paleo theorists that make a very compelling argument that human anatomy actually evolved because we mastered fire. And when you're cooking something, you're pre-digesting it. And if you pre-digest something, not only do you increase the scope of the foods that you can consume, you also accelerate and you increase the efficiency with which you convert that food into calories. And if you can actually metabolize the food 10 times more efficiently, your digestive tract shortens, and the energy that your body expends in order to digest food can be redirected probably to your brain. Animals that don't cook food have small brains. Animals that a human being can cook food can have a very short digestive tract, can eat. Right? You channel your fire and you can light up a cave, you can light up a camp, you can light up a tent, you can light up any area. And with the seeing comes communicating. A certain presumptive arrogance or ignorance amongst modern men. We think that kind of everything worth doing was done in the past 2,000 years or 3,000 years. I kind of figure 100,000 years ago, people were doing all this stuff. We might not have the writings of it, but they were pretty smart. I can use it for hardening, right? I can cook things, right? I could harden the tip of a spear, right? I can use it to work metals, and eventually we used it to work metals, and that ushered us into, from the Stone Age to the Bronze Age to the Iron Age. If I dropped you into 100,000 BC, I don't think you would solo chase after a bunch of stuff with 4 legs. I think you would start by finding a canyon and start a fire on one end and dig a trench on the other end and let a mastodon trip on it and break its neck. What makes human beings unique is, as far as I can see, they're the only animal that plays with fire. And from the point we started to play with fire, we started to evolve at a very rapid rate. And when you've got fire, you started the fire, it's all good, but now I want you to go back 100,000 years and be running around in 42-degree temperature while it's raining on you. Human beings harnessed fire, and it made all the difference. And then along comes the next set of thoughts, right? If you can harness fire, maybe you can develop a brain. And then I think they found arrowheads that go back 100,000 years. I mean, they're if you study Roman history and you go back 1,000 years before Rome, they had slingers. I mean, the Balearic Islands, like Ibiza, they were very famous for slingers. I mean, people invented bullets thousands of years before guns. Guns were just the latest idea of putting bullets together with gunpowder. The lead bullets probably came along 10,000 BC. And maybe more, maybe 100,000 BC. This is a straightforward idea. If your life depended upon it, you would figure it out. And humanity wouldn't be here if we hunted or defended ourselves using spears. But if you go back 1,000,000 years, the adversaries were never in the same frame. If you made it this far and you were a human being, you mastered the art of death from above. I mean, killed from a distance and nobody knew that you were there. It's not a modern invention. Not only would you stand back 50 meters or 100 meters, you would stand up. There's only two types of human beings. There's the type that figured that out, and that's your grandparents. Mm-hmm. And there's the type that were a bit sloppy about one of those things, and they didn't like it. They're gone. Technologies that are dominating today, they're dominating because they're able to deliver force faster, harder, stronger. If it's got the characteristic that it can be made harder, it can be made smarter, it can be made stronger, it can be made faster, there's something compelling about it. That's why digital gold is thousands of times better than gold. A mastodon is a mastodon. They're not getting harder, faster, stronger, smarter. They're just doing what they do. Human beings are, but only because of innovation. And so missiles are just a tool, but they're illustrative. Fire is an energy network, an energy source. It's a battery, an energy source, and you can deliver it in a certain way. And then that takes us to hydraulics, which is power from water, and water is a network. And another source of energy is buoyancy. Right? I take You ever try to pick up a 2,000-pound weight and carry it on your back up a hill or just across? Put a 2,000-pound weight on a carriage, put it on the back of a donkey, drag it on skids. Problem, right? In this particular case, can't be solved with fire. We can't easily burn it. On the other hand, if you needed to move 2,000 pounds, you put it on a barge, you put it in the water, and the water pushes back 2,000 pounds, and I can push it with one hand. Oil is money. They think oil is power. They think, that, and let me tell you, oil is not, it's not really power. It's not wealth. Water is wealth. Water is the key to life. If I gave you $10 billion and as much land as you wanted in the desert, you can't create life. The pyramids got built 2,000 years before Cleopatra and Caesar. How'd they haul it up there? And some of the most fascinating videos I've seen on YouTube are those YouTube videos that show how they build hydraulic elevators to move a 2-ton or 4-ton stone up by floating it, up a channel to the side of a pyramid. And I totally believe that's how they did it. They actually used understanding water and the dynamics of water. There is no cradle of civilization in the Aegean or anywhere. And I'll give you another. There's a reason that Equus and the equestrian class were the Roman knights. The knights were the equestrian class, and what it meant in ancient Rome was the top 1%, or the top 0.1%. The nobles of Rome were the equestrian class. What it meant to be rich and powerful was you had the right to bring a horse into the city. No. The problem is if they allowed anybody to bring a horse into the city, it would be so unsanitary as to render the city uninhabitable. So most ancient cities, if you wanted them to work, you would have to have them human-powered. And now you've got this dilemma of how do you move goods around? Tell me, how do I move things around cleanly? I need a clean energy source that is not going to foul my sanitary system, that is not going to actually kill me. And of course, the Mediterranean is the perfect ocean.
No.
Because you can oftentimes navigate without leaving the side of land. It's hard to get too lost. There's a lot of ports. Well, in 1000 AD, this was a Phoenician port. And then the Greek Empire came along and it was an Athenian port, 500 AD. And then the Carthaginians kicked them out and it was Carthaginian port. And then the Romans kicked them out and it was a Roman port. And then after the Romans fell, the Venetians took this over, this Venetian port. And then eventually it became a British port, Like that's the story of Malta, that's the story of Corfu, that's the story of, of lots of different ports in the Mediterranean. And the reason why is if you want to dominate the Mediterranean, you need to have a port within 1 or 2 days sail that you can hide in whenever the mistrals blow. And if you control that network of ports, when the weather goes bad, you go into the port and your ship doesn't get sunk. And if you don't, and you're like a week away from a port that's friendly, and the weather gets bad, you get dashed against the rocks and you just die. To get to the Iron Age.
Yeah.
And we come back to this issue of being harder, right, and being stronger. We harness that fire and we start to work metals, and we move into bronze, and then we move into iron. And I think the Roman Empire is a great model for the way that human beings interact with technology and the way that they interact with a competitive world, and become both anti-fragile and get harder, smarter, faster, and stronger. You go read Livy's History of Rome, and he writes about the Roman Republic had 700 good years. 700 years before it even went to empire. And we start with this idea of Roman politics. You've heard the phrase, beware the Ides of March. And it refers to Julius Caesar. And, people think of it as oh, well, that's when someone's going to kill Caesar. But it's really referring to the fact that for 700 years, the Romans got together on March 15th and had an election every year. The Romans were the most organized of all of the civilizations we can find in the ancient world, and that's how they grew to dominate. They were just organized, and one of their forms of organization is, and this is a thing of beauty, they're running a process where every year, March 15th, they have their election. They appoint 2 consuls. They appoint all their officers. The consuls then, they conduct about 2 weeks worth of religious ceremonies. They all worship, they appease the gods, they're getting psyched up, right? They're reminding themselves that they're unique. They're They raise an army. They train the army. We go from March 15th all the way through to May 1st, 6 weeks. In those 6 weeks, they get organized, celebrate, get excited, wait for a good omen, and they're really getting ready. And then the campaigning season starts, May 1st. Everybody that knows anything about Europe and the Mediterranean knows the weather gets good on May 1st. The problem before May 1st, it rains, there's storms. If you set out to sea or you set out across terrain before that time period, if the cold doesn't get you, the storm's going to get you, or your ship's going to sink or something. It's in the history of all these wars, more people die from natural causes than they die from bullets of the enemy or from the enemy. So the number one danger is nature's going to kill you. So right. The Romans basically did summer campaignings. You can't navigate the Med in the winter. Like even in the modern day, it's no one would want to go yachting in the Med in the winter. It's just not comfortable. You get storms. Weather is very uncertain. And so the political system had a certain elegance to it because it was tied to the calendar. It was tied to nature. It was a natural cycle, and it took into account the need of human beings to celebrate each other's successes. I go campaign, I come back, I get a triumph. It took into account their need to have a common faith. common faith. You know, the faith is critical. If we're not all Romans and if we don't all believe the same thing, why are we going to die for each other?
Right.
That's the Roman way. And then they also took into account human motivation, which is everybody's got an ego. Everybody needs their turn. Nobody can hog all the power. So even if you were the greatest general this year, you got to give it up to someone else next year. And as long as they kept turning up, and if I'm the second most powerful family and you're from the most powerful family, maybe I'll support you for consul with an understanding that it's my turn next year.
Right.
As Charles de Gaulle said, right, graveyards are full of the tombstones of indispensable men. But the point is, when you know that everybody's watching you and that you can be replaced and will be replaced next year and your future is uncertain, it brings out a higher degree of professionalism. And that's the competition in the market, just like a whole new level. The Romans manufactured, ballista, and they manufactured catapults, and they manufactured every sword to be the same length, every shield to be the same size, every soldier took the same step, the same length. Everything was the same. You could be an 8-foot tall Goliath and the Roman 5-foot 10-inch tall normal dude, right, is going to beat the crap out of you because you're not going to get within 12 feet of him because you're going to take a spear in the gut from the 12 guys standing to his left and his right as you charge, right? It's not that the Romans invented everything. It's just the Romans stole every good idea from every civilization, from the Greeks, from the Carthaginians, from the whatever that they crushed. And because they lasted, we're able to read their histories. But, it kind of blows your mind when you think that in 500, by the way, you think the Carthaginians invented that? Maybe they stole it from the Phoenicians. BC, if you want to win wars, you don't just make ships and you don't just train hard and you don't make wagons, right? Roman roads. The Romans had standardized parts, a standardized gauge for a wagon wheel. Every Roman wagon rolling on the road is carving ruts in the road. People that believe, that recoil in standardization. Well, that Roman wagon gauge eventually became the standard width of a railroad track in Europe, and then eventually the standard width of a railroad track everywhere. So if you want to know how wide a Roman chariot was, or war chariot, or any chariot, just go stand on a railroad anywhere on earth. The Romans gave that to you. And the reason why they did it that way is because if you build wagons with different gauges, they fall in the rut, they snap the axle, and that's death.
Yeah.
By the way, it's not that every civilization figured this out. It's just that every civilization that insisted upon doing it a different way with different bells and whistles got crushed to death.
Right.
Those roads were the logistics network of the Roman Empire. And if you can move goods and services, if you can move armies faster inside your borders, then your enemies can move inside their borders, right? Then you're going to win, right? if everybody lays down a railroad track that's a certain width, and you come up with an idea for a car that's got a different width, who are you going to sell it to?
Right.
People talk about protocols being important, right? Well, the TCP/IP wasn't the first protocol. Roman roads probably weren't the first protocol either. But the point is, protocols matter. And the Egyptians had protocols to build those pyramids. Standard size and standard widths and standard weights and measures. Those protocols matter a heck of a lot. And if you don't have them, it's impossible for people to cooperate. So money, we've talked about money a lot as being essential for civilization to cooperate and allowing us to specialize. But all these other logistics protocols or military protocols are, in their own way, equally important. The Romans understood the importance of hydraulics, and they took it to a new level. They actually created aqueducts that would bring water from up to 70 miles away to a given city. But a lot of coastal towns on the Med that are not inhabitable. I mean, the natural economic density is really a function of the amount of water per year. So if the amount of water per year is based on rainwater, maybe you can have 500 people live in the city. And if you bring the aqueduct, it goes to 5,000 or 50,000. And so the economic density requires the hydraulic flow for sanitation and just to keep everybody alive. And so engineering the roads, engineering the aqueducts, it's the rails upon which the entire Iron Age civilization was built. And Romans, if anything, they're engineers, and they elevated engineering above all. And a pottery wheel. For 5,000 years, nobody in the entire continent thought to take the wheel and turn it this way and roll it.
Right.
Like, they knew a wheel was useful.
Yeah.
I give you the wheel, Robert, but they never invented the wheelbarrow. They never invented the wagon. There's no rolling stock anywhere in America. And so you're like, think about the consequences of that insight. Like, how is it possible that not a single person in the entire continent ever thought they might want to turn the wheel this way up?
Right.
But it's such a profound idea.
Right.
And the blockchain and Bitcoin is a wheel. It's I can use this stuff if I turn it this way, It's I take a couple of, they're not complicated ideas, public. When you look at the classic guns, germs, and steel type narratives, like the Europeans, they got hardened and tougher because they were always fighting with each other, and living with your animals made you tougher, and having people come through from Asia made you tougher. And in the absence of all those orderly rules, then you you have just a degradation of the human condition. And we started to crawl out with the Renaissance, and you know, if you look at all the great cities in the world, all the great cities grew as nexus, as the central node of an empire. So Rome was the nexus of an empire. Carthage was the nexus of an empire. When they lose their empire, they collapse. The only way you generate enough money to make a great city is you have to scrape a tax off of all the energy, all the commercial value in a large place. A fisherman casts a wide net to capture the fish. That's your empire. The Roman shtick was, you know, pay us 10% when it comes into Rome and 10% when it goes into the next port, and we'll take 20% of the value added, or maybe 30%, or whatever we're going to take, right? If you go into Venice and you look around the Grand Canal, you see all these palazzos. They're all just warehouses. I bring a ship into Venice. I offload my cargo, and then it goes out the back and it gets barged up and down the canal, and it gets transshipped to a new ship. In that world, each ship ran this route. Venice to Alexandria was one trade route. Venice to Rome is another trade route. Venice to Istanbul is another trade route. You're at the nexus. You're running these shipping networks. And of course, you got to bribe the guy in Istanbul, or maybe, you know, your son marries his daughter. And that's how you get to come in and out of Istanbul without getting murdered or getting your stuff stolen. You know, and eventually all the families in Venice intermarry. Like, you know, I know you, you're my second cousin. That's how we don't cheat each other. And there's no way, you can't solve the traveling salesman problem. There's no way I can take a ship from Istanbul to Alexandria to Venice to Rome. I would basically get overtaxed or extorted in each port unless I actually was, you know, friendly, right?
Right.
The way that works is you have a hub and spoke system, and there's always one central city, and there's always one set of families or companies, and they intermarry, and they trust each other, and they just agree, I'm going to buy wheat for a nickel or for a dime in Alexandria. I'm going to bring it to Venice, and I'm going to sell it to you for 50 cents. It's the people at the center of the network that are actually getting 10, 20, 30, 50% of all the commerce.
Right.
Which is all the energy. Now, and what's the definition of a smuggler, or or a pirate? The definition of a smuggler is someone that doesn't want to give me half their stuff.
Right.
I stop that. I have to have a navy that goes to kill them. Yep. So you have the Carthaginian navy stopping smuggling so they can tax half the stuff. And that's Carthago, Delenda, Est. Carthage must be destroyed. Why? Because two people can't shake down the same guy of half his stuff. There's nothing left. If I take half your stuff as a tax, I can't, it's like the tax wars.
Yeah.
The Carthaginians are taxing the shippers and the Romans want the money. So therefore, the Romans must defeat the Carthaginians. Now the Romans tax you, then they fall, and the Venetians rise. Now the Venetian navy controls the Med. Then you've got, you ever go to Venice, there's this great Renaissance painting, the Battle of Lepanto. And the Battle of Lepanto is when the King of Spain allies with the Pope from Rome, the head of the Roman Catholic Church, and with the Doge of Venice. And those three navies fight the Turks, the invading Muslims from Istanbul, and they beat them. And it's the triumph of Christendom. But it gets you thinking about why were they all killing each other in the first place over the Med? And you realize it's because they're fighting over control of the mercantile network. You've heard the word Roman Catholic Church, right? You ever heard the phrase Venetian Catholic? When the Venetians terminated the Catholic Church in Venice, the Catholic Church in the entire Venetian Empire didn't terminate with the Pope in Rome. It terminated with the Doge in Venice. And so that means all tithes, right? All due goes to Venice and stops. You can't have an empire unless the person at the top of the empire is also in control of the religion. Because if you don't control the religion, then someone else takes half your money, you see? It's all about energy flow. Pontifex Maximus originally refers to the Roman consul, to the head of Rome, right? Augustus Caesar was the Pontifex Maximus. So the Romans had it. Eventually, the high priest.
Right.
So the high priest, the Roman consuls were the high priest of Rome for 700 years. If you're elected general, you're also the priest. You run all the religious ceremonies. When did Venice start to decline? When they lost control of the church. At the end of the day, they start sinking because you can't afford to maintain those buildings. You know, you can't afford to maintain 100-story buildings in Manhattan unless you're at the center of a financial empire. There are a lot of securities on Wall Street where there's only two market makers. There's the one bank and the other bank, and they trade with each other. And if you're buying at the bottom, or you're buying at the top of the spread, and you're selling at the bottom of the spread, and the spread is 2%, Robert. And so if I turn over $1 billion worth of bonds, I'm paying $20 million in commissions, and there's a monopoly there. And the $20 million is just flowing into what? It's flowing into the building. By the way, if you go to Amsterdam, Amsterdam is the city of canals. It's a big if you've ever seen a distribution center, Amsterdam's that, but it's that for barges before we had machines. That's what Venice is. That's what every great mercantile, that's what they did in every mercantile center. And when you get to Martin Luther's time, you realize one of the key drivers is there's no way that we can rise or elevate our civilization if we have to send all of our money to Rome.
Right.
You see this struggle throughout medieval history. William the Conqueror had that struggle. You see the struggle of the Northern European German nobles And then, of course, it punctuates itself with Henry VIII, who eventually forms the Anglican Church. So he can be the Pontifex Maximus. And if the church terminates with the King of England, they don't have to ship any money, down to Italy, nor do they have to ask permission to change their alliances and get married and do what they will. Well, it's useful to have God on your side. It's always been useful.
Right.
And so that drives a lot of stuff throughout the Renaissance, and it drives you can say that Northern Europe broke off from the Roman Catholic Church for religious reasons, or you could say the Northern European powers that be created the religion for political reasons and economic reasons. Church. But either way, it's kind of a triumph of history that everybody's forgotten that there used to be lots of, why do they call it Roman Catholic if there weren't other Catholics? How many different branches of the Catholic Church do you think there were? Like 1,000. There could have been a lot. They just kind of coalesced over time. But here's the general principle. Everywhere on earth where you see a big city, it was the center of an empire. Paris, London, Hong Kong, New York, Venice, Rome. Everywhere. And by the way, everywhere where you see a city that's fallen upon hard times, that's been destroyed, its empire lapsed. And now the question is, what are the empires of the future? Where do they form? And that takes us really to the Steel Age, the 19th century, the robber barons and the like. And you can see with shipping networks, those canals gave way to free ports and eventually gave way to container ships. And container ships totally remade everything, and they shifted power to Singapore and Hong Kong and companies like Maersk. And ultimately, it's a low energy, it's a componentized way to move things around. The most efficient way to move anything on Earth is modern containers. Put all your stuff in a container ship, and the container goes onto a ship. They've got standard loading facilities into a port. They've got standard train cars and standard trucks. Everything standardized. I guess, traditional empires are producing security. The number one export of the United States is security. Like literally, I can live in Miami Beach and I don't worry about someone shooting me across. They have that saying about Genghis Khan. They said when the Mongols controlled all of Asia, a virgin could have ridden from one end of the empire to the other with a pot of gold on her head and not be molested. The Mongols weren't screwing around either.
Yeah.
You intercept their mail. If anything gets stolen, anybody gets hurt, they show up with an army and they murder everybody for 100 miles in every direction, kind of to make the point, don't F with the system.
Right.
Now, most of these empires, they generally provide this kind of security for their citizens, not always for the non-citizens or the aliens or the slaves or the whatever. Bitcoin is a security, and Bitcoin's number one value proposition is security. It's security of energy, right? If energy is translated to money and money is translated to Bitcoin and it's stored in the Bitcoin network, you're securitizing your assets, in a cloud of, behind a wall of encrypted energy. And in that regard, it provides an important right and empowerment to the individual. Nazi Germany in the 30s, all the Jews had their money locked up in Germany. And so the way the system worked is they operated as bankers, and they allowed people to launder their money out of Germany, and they would take a haircut, 10, 20, 30% initially, then 50%, then 70%, then 90%, until consequently, people didn't want to leave. Right? And so if you don't have your monetary power or your assets secured virtually, then your physical security is always at risk, because you can't leave, nor can you protect yourself, right? You can't pay for anything to protect yourself, and you can't get out, or you can't pay to get out. One of the most useful or common, or not common, one of the compelling use cases of Bitcoin would be if I'm a refugee trying to flee a war zone. Because it's either that or gold. And the problem with gold is there's a lot of people with guns. They're going to take it from you.
Yep.
And at least with Bitcoin, you could pay the guy with the gun half the money when you started, and the other half when you got there. And the worst he can do is blow your head off, but he's not getting your money. Whereas if you got gold, he just blows your head off, takes the gold.
Yep.
If we think about the steel age, these rail networks are another network to deliver energy faster, stronger, smarter, harder. Of course, at the nexus of every transportation hub, there's an economic center. So railheads, if a great city isn't a port, it's at the center of a railroad juncture. And when you bring in, a lot of times, sometimes at the center of the rail juncture, you can tax all the trains. So if goods come from Spain into Paris and they're going to Germany, the French get to take a tax right there in Paris. So the railheads became a nexus. The other fascinating thing about the railroads is they became really instrumental to logistics movement of armies, and they drove economic and political power. But it's a reminder that a lot of times the difference between winning and losing and living and dying is do you have railroads? The continent, right? The Union Pacific Railroad, and once the railroad crossed the continent, it's a manifest destiny. The United States was going to dominate. Without that railroad, was it 1,000 times more expensive to move stuff overland?
Right. Yeah.
Like, Google is, they're very good at saying, we don't do anything else that's going to be 10x or 100x better. I mean, so that's a Silicon Valley trope. Don't bother to do it unless you're going to have a breakthrough that's 100x. And well, all these things were 100x better, but a railroad we take for granted. It could be, I give you 5 tons of stuff, carry it from New York to California, count the amount of energy it's going to take you. Now put it on a railroad car. Try again.
All right.
You think that's not faster and stronger? And that takes us to John D. Rockefeller, right? Before Standard Oil comes along, people are actually hunting whales. They're getting in wooden ships, chasing around the Indian Ocean to kill a whale, boil down its blubber, make kerosene, and burn a lamp.
Yeah.
Not a very efficient way to gather energy. So then along comes oil, and oil is 1,000 times more efficient way to get energy. And what Standard Oil was it was first an energy producer, but it was also an energy storage device. It's a battery, right? Because the best way to store energy is put it in a tank. It was also an energy network. Standard Oil, they bought up they didn't actually buy the fields, they bought the refineries. They refined the oil, they stored the oil, they bought up all the tanker cars, they bought up all the tanker ships, they locked down all of the networks, and they basically had an energy network. They actually had guys driving around with carriages to deliver their energy to every single retail store. They had retail distribution. They would even give away the furnaces to sell the energy. They did a Jeff Bezos thing. Amazon Prime. People think Jeff Bezos invented it. He didn't invent it. I mean, if you read the biography of John D. Rockefeller, Rockefeller invented it all. He did it all. He gave away the razors to sell the razor blades. He's the first guy to realize that, by the way, that you have to form a cartel, or you have to form some kind of understanding of scarcity. If there's no scarcity, there's so much volatility. So you had the world's first serious energy network there. And it's such a powerful network that 100 years after Rockefeller's dead, those companies still are worth $1 trillion, right? You talk about scarcity. The problem of using a commodity as money is when the price goes up, people produce too much of it.
Why?
It was a very inefficient industry with massive volatility. And so he consolidated it to drop the volatility so that they could standardize every component along the way.
Interesting.
So that he could drive to a lower energy level, right? I mean, a more efficient energy system. Like if you calculate, the value of all of your human effort in modern energy cost, a quarter. And you think about where we got to, and we got through to that by channeling this energy. And it must be, again, it's 1,000x, 10,000x more energy. In fact, just a general theme you see everywhere where there's an explosion of innovation and an explosion of vitality. Somebody tapped into 1,000x more energy or figured out how to deliver the energy. Oil, oil was originally, it was all about kerosene and lighting and then heating. And then, of course, the automobile shot it up by a factor of 10, and that was the killer app.
Mm-hmm.
Here's an interesting one. Kraft, Hershey's, and Post cereal. They're technology companies. People don't think of them as that. Before they came along, there wasn't no breakfast. That people didn't eat breakfast. Kraft and Post figured out how to box cornflakes and put it. And what they did is they stabilized food energy and put it in a container that didn't bleed the energy, that didn't leak energy. the origin of branding, the Kraft brand, the Hershey's brand, the whatever brand, the origin of branding is I make it in a clean room, hermetically sealed. The number one value proposition, Robert, wasn't it's good ketchup. The number one, or it's good tomatoes or good soup or good whatever. The number one value proposition is it's not going to kill you. Right? You ever actually make some leftovers and leave it in your refrigerator for 2 months and eat it? By the way, here's a better one. Why don't you make something in your kitchen and then leave it in your closet for 2 months without a refrigerator? Because they didn't have refrigerators. Frozen food came along later. And Marjorie Merriweather Post became like one of the richest women of the century. Because her father gave her Post cereal and they were able to stabilize starch in a box at room temperature. And then B, because she bought the first frozen food company, and she realized the ability to actually freeze food was going to be a game changer. And before that, no one had ever frozen food before. You think they're not technologists.
Right.
It's a food energy company. You need energy in food form, in nutritional form to not die.
Yeah.
Can I take electricity from Detroit and deliver it to you in San Francisco today? No. Can I deliver electricity from Detroit to Grand Rapids, Michigan? Yes. When it gets to you, how long can you store it in your battery? It bleeds 2% a month. Can I ship food from Detroit to Grand Rapids? Yeah. When it gets there, how long can you store it in your cellar? A day? A week? Well, if the answer is 2 weeks, there's no national business there. There's no national brand. The answer needs to be 3 months or 6 months. Now there's a national brand. So these guys that were launching these businesses, they were really launching clean room manufacturing plants that captured energy or something of value. They were store of value, Robert. Store of value that would not decay or bleed due to bacterial infestation or spoilage. And because of that, the brand became important. Just like the Standard brand was important, the kerosine's not going to explode. It's clean, right?
Yeah.
Is the gasoline clean? Is the ketchup clean? You go to Hershey's, Pennsylvania, they got a factory. It's a work of art. If it's more complicated than most computer programs. They wrote a computer program in steel. It's like, don't F that up, right? Like, you can't, there's no version 2 coming. Write your program in an analog computer welded in steel that takes up a football field. That's what they did. And in one end goes like milk and eggs and, and out the other end comes like boxes of chocolate bars, 50,000 an hour. And it's not just they come out perfectly uniform. It's they come out without bacteria in them, and you can put them on a shelf and they won't make your kids sick. Yeah, now, with regard to businesses, I would say that all of the great businesses, the growth companies, were all technology companies in their time. And eventually, and almost by definition, they stop growing when they are no longer cutting edge technology companies, right? There are other businesses that are more like rent-seeking businesses, or they're concessions. You know, the guy that sells bottled water in the shadow of the Notre Dame Cathedral, that's a business. It relies upon political largesse. You know, maybe there's a real estate business, right? I own that real estate, and then I sell you water or lemonade on that real estate, right? There are those kind of businesses. But the growth companies, right? Standard Oil, you know, was a growth company. U.S. Steel, Boeing, IBM. In that period when they're growing, they're a technology company. John D. Rockefeller was worth $400 million in his money. Multiply it by 100. Yeah.
Right.
Multiply by 200.
Right.
You know, he got to being worth $1 billion, I think. So he probably was worth 200 billion. It's important at this point for us to just look at the impact of steel and aluminum through this entire era. Carnegie created an empire based on steel, and Andrew Mellon's empire was substantially based on aluminum and the aluminum Alcoa. And steel is an elemental force for the civil engineering industry, and aluminum became that elemental force for aviation. Without steel, there is no modern city. You know, you build a building in wood, it's 2 stories. Build a building in bricks or masonry, it's 5 stories as max. In order to create New York or London or any great city, you need steel, and you need, of course, an elevator. Straightforward things, but of the two of them, steel is the harder development. The elevator you could probably figure out. It's a counterweight on a pulley, whereas steel is iron laced with carbon, and it's really hard. How hard? It's think about how complicated it is in order to refine steel and shape steel when it's molten and it melts through just about anything you might put it in or on. So technology or not technology? Harder technology. Everybody thinks they're in the technology business today. Nobody deals with technology that's as dangerous and tricky as what Carnegie and those early steel refiners are dealing with, or the DuPonts handling nitroglycerin. Like, what do you think happens when you mishandle nitroglycerin? When you mishandle crypto, you lose some money. When you mishandle nitroglycerin, everything gets blown up again, right, for half a mile in every direction. And aluminum, again, not so easy either. So these are really difficult technologies, but really elemental, because the difference between steel and no steel is, do you build a 100-story skyscraper? Steel's the perfect material for civil engineering. It's cheap. It's got extraordinary tensile strength. If you paint it or protect it from corrosion, it will last forever. Literally forever, Robert. If you build a steel ship and you punch a hole in it, you can weld the hole with another piece of steel, and the weld will be stronger than the original cold rolled steel. It's that strong. So in the world of strong, this is the strongest of strong materials. It's strong. It's cheap. Carnegie figured it out. They built every bridge with it. No steel, no bridges. No bridges, no Manhattan. All modern civil engineering is based on steel. So then along comes aviation, and they try to build a plane with steel. What happens? You ever see a steel airplane?
No.
It's the perfect material. It's cheap. It's indestructible. Why not build an airplane with steel? Shape, aluminum's 20 times more expensive than steel. You know, and it flexes, and it's difficult to work. It doesn't matter. Steel doesn't fly. Iron doesn't fly. You try to find a metal which is stable, that's going to be a structurally sound metal for aviation, and aluminum's the one. No aluminum, no aviation. It's an elemental force, and on that element, you make that breakthrough, then you have hundreds. You have $1 trillion industry.
Right.
They all kind of come down to networks that move energy around.
Mm-hmm.
Standard Oil is an energy network. The railroads are energy networks, right? Oh, no railroad, no tanker car with energy on it, right? The railroad is the energy network moving the oil around. The airplanes, another energy network moving high frequency cargo around and information around.
Mm-hmm.
And each one of them, build another one, and then the food networks. And the result of all of them is there are large corporations and huge opportunities for wealth creation if you get to the node of the network.
Mm.
Is average life expectancy at 1900 is 50 in America. It was 70 under the Romans. It was 30 in the Dark Ages. It might have been 32, 33 in the Revolutionary War in the US. We crawl back up to 50. And then by 1950, it's 70. And so probably the most rapid expansion in the quality of life in thousands of years is in that 50 years from 1900 to 1950 because of the conquest of infectious diseases. And that's all really a function of discovering the science of microbes and sterilization, understanding that you need to be sterile. And then the second is antibiotics. And those two things together were extraordinary. Antibiotics alone and penicillin is responsible for the defeat of tuberculosis, and tuberculosis killed 1 billion people. The White Plague. If you caught tuberculosis, it was a death sentence. I think it killed Chopin, killed all sorts of people.
Mm.
1 billion people, more than any war. And of course, in this particular case, if you look at history books on the 20th century, they give it like 2 paragraphs. The impact of technology, of modern medicine and antibiotics and networks and cheap energy and sterilization and sanitation and running water, the impact of that so dwarfs every political thing that took place in the century that what humans triumph throughout history by channeling energy, right? That all of these things come down to how did I channel energy? So navy power, right? The British Navy ruled the sea. The Phoenicians, the Venetians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Americans today control the seas via their aircraft carriers and by naval power. And naval power is just bringing overwhelming force to bear faster, stronger force that's faster, that's harder than any other force anywhere on Earth. All empires are driven by that naval power. In time, we invented airplanes, and then air power became the thing, right? And if I could get above you, and we saw this conclusively, it is impossible for a modern nation state to function if it does not control its own airspace. Working opposite. It's an energy thing, right? So I'm moving from a lower energy state, I'm on the ground, moving armies around, to a higher energy state. I have a boat, I'm moving heavy munitions around, to a higher energy state. I'm above you, dropping munitions on you. Then after that became nuclear power, right? You harness nuclear power, and that ended World War II pretty definitively in a hurry. Then we go to space satellite power, and you go up in the gravity well some more, and that manifests itself primarily with GPS, right? All through human history, since 1 million years ago to today, it's really the story of intelligent people looking around for where is the energy coming from, and how do I channel it in a network in order to achieve something harder, smarter, faster, stronger. Clear that information is flowing across borders, and even when people try to stop it, they're defeated by VPNs and anonymous browsing, and technology is empowering the individual and giving them more sovereignty.
That's right.
And it's harder and harder in those ways for the government to control what information you get and then how you manage your assets.
Right.
Yeah, it's more and more things dematerialize the software, and they move into cyberspace. It seems like it gets harder for any one government to assert control over the things that take place virtually. A lot of times you'll see an S-curve where it'll start slow and then it'll accelerate until it reaches diminishing returns, and then all of a sudden it's not an interesting technology anymore. You see that a lot. But one of the lessons of history is it's very difficult to figure out when the curve starts. And it's hard to stop it once it starts, but it's a lot easier to invest in it and to forecast it once it starts. But before it starts, people will say, well, next year this will commercialize, or in 2 years, or in 5 years, 10 years. You could be off by 2 years, you could be off by 100 years. Technology fails until it succeeds. In the year 1902, before the Wright brothers flew, that next year, if you'd asked the most learned people on Earth, they would have given you 100 reasons why airplanes will never fly. And the thing about these paradigm shifts is, oftentimes, it's not the learned individuals that make the breakthrough. Aircraft weren't designed by professors of aeronautics and astronautics and engineering and fluid dynamics and mathematicians. They all failed miserably, right? The Wright brothers were bicycle mechanics. They had a bicycle shop, tinkerers,
Yeah.
right? They're the ones that ushered in the age. And they did it against all conventional wisdom. And on the other hand, Leonardo da Vinci tried to develop his own flying contraption. Every brilliant person for hundreds of years tried it, failed. All failed. And then some dudes in Dayton, Ohio that have a bicycle shop succeed. It happens like that. You know, the story of John Harrison discovering a method to determine longitude on the ocean, it's articulated in the book Longitude. It's an amazing story. Everybody knew how to find latitude. It was easy. You just sight against the North Star. But longitude is very hard because the Earth's spinning all the time and required massively complicated calculations. They gave it to the Newtonian professors at Cambridge and Oxford, the smartest mathematicians in the world, the smartest astronomers in the world. No one could figure it out. Finally, they posted a 10,000-pound prize, and John Harrison, who was not a mathematician, he's a clockmaker, figured it out. And the way he figured it out is he made a clock that was accurate. And they put one clock on the ship, and they set it to the Greenwich Observatory, the Royal Observatory, which is in Greenwich, England. Hence the term Greenwich Mean Time. Greenwich Mean Time comes because you sail down the Thames past the Royal Observatory in Greenwich. You set your clock on that, and then you have another clock. And then every day at noon, if you're in the Caribbean, you look up, and then you set that clock, and then you just subtract the time on the one from the time from the other, multiply by 15 degrees, and you got your longitude. So you see lots of examples in history where people try to do something and they either accidentally discover it, like penicillin, or a tinkerer discovers it and not the educated, and then all the professors crap all over it and they all swear it'll never work. And the tendency is either to reject it, people don't like change, or it doesn't get embraced until everybody dies or until there's a war. And war has a way of opening your mind, because when someone drops a bomb on your head and you're burning or screaming, then the pain causes you to take a more open-minded attitude. So a lot of stuff happened after World War II and happens in various wars, and you can trace it throughout human history. That drives innovation faster. You know, generational change will drive it faster. People keep trying it, and then just because it's failed 1,000 times doesn't mean it won't succeed. But when it does succeed, then it's probably unstoppable for a while. Arthur C. Clarke writes, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Thousands and thousands of examples of magic things in our lives today, literally magic things that are just technical things. It's always been that way, and to a primitive man, right, a rifle looks magical. Or an airplane. And now we're starting to deal with some software technologies and digital technologies that don't just look magical to a primitive man. They're going to look magical to a modern man.
Right.